Welcome to AINdebrief, where we take a look back at the most important aviation stories of the past week by the AIN editors who covered them. I'm AIN Alerts editor Chad Troutvetter. In this week's episode, AIN Air Transport editor Gregory Polek talks about the push for an ICAO framework for COVID testing that would reopen borders for travel. AIN editor-in-chief Matt Thurber and senior editor Jerry Siebenmark discuss the issues surrounding urban air mobility infrastructure. Senior editor Kerry Lynch gives an overview of this week's virtual Bombardier Safety Standdown. Jerry also explains Universal Avionics' tactic behind its mobile display unit. And senior editor Curt Epstein highlights 3 family-owned business aviation companies that are starting on their 3rd or 4th generation. So let's start it off with Greg. Greg, what's going on with COVID testing that will allow borders to reopen?
ICAO is planning on submitting or publishing a report on COVID testing for passengers by the end of this month or early November. This is sort of a hot button issue because IATA, for example, has been pushing for uniform testing protocols to replace quarantine requirements. I mean, that's what they've been pushing for a while now. And I guess not that ICAO's recommendations are necessarily binding, but this will basically give a framework for whatever they decide on. What it'll be recommendations for the entire world to decide on how to coordinate the whole testing process.
Is there going to be any recommendations for airports that will offer testing either before the flight or a couple days before people go?
I don't know. It all depends on what they've got. I think this is all about testing at the airport itself. That's what IATA has been pushing for. They want mandatory antigen tests, those fast tests. So those aren't as accurate as the PRC tests or whatever they're called.
PCR, yeah, but they're a lot faster. I think some of them are ready in 15 minutes.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the only way you could really do it at the airport itself. Yeah, they didn't really give any hints as to what the recommendations are going to actually be. That's the problem. So I don't really have a lot to say about it.
What are the airlines hoping for, I guess?
Well, they're hoping. Well, IATA, which represents all the airlines, they're hoping for a uniform test, antigen test, which they claim should only cost about $10 a passenger, to replace the quarantines.
They want the test to be taken before they take off or when they land?
Yeah, right. Well, I'm assuming it's before you actually take off while you're at the airport at departure. Whether the ICAO guidelines say something else, I don't know. It hasn't come out yet. So, but that's what IATA is pushing for.
Yeah, and I guess they want the quarantines and the border restrictions taken down if that happens, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the whole thrust of this. This is their motivation, really, because the quarantine requirements and the travel restrictions are really putting the squeeze on the airlines.
Yeah, and the passengers who want to fly really can't because of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, they came out with statistics saying something like 80% of people just won't fly because of the quarantines.
That's a lot. Yeah, that's a big deterrent. Well, let's hope they can get that ironed out soon.
Yeah, let's hope so. But it'll be interesting to find out what happens. But this came out basically at the Flight Safety Foundation's annual safety summit that they held online this week. And there were 2 ICAO officials that kind of like kicked off the whole thing, and that's where they sort of mentioned the fact that they were going to be doing this by the end of this month or in early November.
So we should see some kind of guidelines in a couple weeks, then, right?
Yeah, it should be. Yeah, be.
That'll be good news for the airline industry, and also for the business aviation side because the border restrictions affect everybody.
Absolutely.
All right, so Greg, actually, you have a personal story about the quarantine hampering travel. You were going to go to Hawaii next week, but you can't because of the 14-day quarantine. So,
Well, not quite. I mean, they were going to lift the quarantine requirement as long as you can get a PCR test done 72 hours before your last leg takes off on the way to Hawaii. That's their requirement. Um, so I had a hard time finding someone who would who to even get an appointment for a test. At least around here, because they want you to do everything online, and everything the requirement is all it has to do with whether or not you have symptoms or not. I didn't have any symptoms, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I'd have to do to actually get a test within 72 hours of that last leg taking off. It would be difficult because the turnover time for the tests are generally more than that. So it's really causing a lot of problems for a lot of people, I think.
so that even stresses more that the airports themselves are going to have to take this into their own hands.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, they're going to be heavily involved in coordinating all of this because that's where the testing is going to happen, the antigen testing.
Yeah.
So, but the word from Alexander de Juniac was he requires uniformity, and basically is the watchword, and collaboration between all the various segments of the industry, between the airlines and the airports, and even the air traffic control people. But yeah, that's it.
All right, thanks, Greg.
Sure, no problem.
So, Matt, you have some news from Jaunt Urban Air Mobility. So, go ahead and spill that.
Thanks, Chad. Yes, today I listened in on the Bavaria Urban Air Mobility Future of Urban Air Transport and Logistics virtual event. And from Jaunt Air Mobility, we had Simon Briseno, one of their PhDs, talk about the technology they're using. But also, he kind of buried the news until the end of his presentation that they have launched a new program called Access Skyways. And this is bringing together Jaunt with two other companies to provide expertise to support the urban air mobility industry. And what they're doing is working with architectural firm PS&S and a company called Price Systems on supporting eVTOL urban air mobility operations with ground and air infrastructure. So that was
So,
kind of interesting.
would this be a consultancy that like a city or urban planners would turn to maybe have vertiports and things like
Yeah, I
that?
mean they're gonna actually serve just about any area you need in the urban air mobility space. So maintenance, flight operations, electrification to support the heavy duty charging demands for batteries, design of infrastructure, community engagement, project management, supply, demand, cost analysis, all that kind of stuff.
So, does this make Jaunt like a one-stop shop for UAM? Then they can provide both the vehicles as well as all the infrastructure and background stuff.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, John's going to use it to further their ambitions with their particular aircraft, but they believe that all of these infrastructure type challenges are going to have to be uh, overcome and facilitated in order for this industry to take off. So then the rest of it was mostly a summary of the progress on the Jaunt program and their current activities, and uh, more information is available on this on AIN's futureflight.aero platform. But basically, Jaunt is developing a uh, kind of a hybrid helicopter fixed wing type vehicle. It's going to seat up to 4 people plus 1 pilot. It will be piloted at first, but eventually autonomously flown. And they're looking at some pretty ambitious figures. They figure they can fly at up to 280 kilometers for a range of about 130 kilometers. So what they're saying is that that enables them to do more than one leg on a single battery charge. And then they're expecting battery technology to improve, which it is slowly but surely, so they'll get better range out of it eventually. Now, right now, Jaunt is testing their current aircraft, which is actually a Carter copter. They bought the program from Carter a little bit ago and have continued the work that Carter had been working on for, it's been about 15 years. And this is a smaller but similarly configured fixed wing and rotorcraft. And it has some fairly good advantages. One of the biggest advantages is that, like a helicopter, it can perform a safe, controlled landing with a complete power loss, kind of like a helicopter auto rotates. But in the Jaunt rotorcraft case, it has weighted tips on the rotor blades, so they have quite a bit of energy stored in them. So even if you lose power, the rotor system will continue to spin fast enough so you can safely fly to a controlled landing. Anyway, they've tested this a bunch of times with the times. They have tested this a bunch of times with the Jaunt technology demonstrator, the former Carter copter. Another big factor with the Jaunt technology is it's pretty quiet. In their testing, they found it's about 70 decibels compared to about a small delivery truck driving by in front of your house.
Well, that'll definitely help with the noise complaints that UAM might bring.
Exactly, and that's one of the things they're thinking about now, because they don't want to design an aircraft and have it be unwelcome in urban neighborhoods.
That's pretty cool. Thanks, Matt. Jerry, you also listened to the Bavarian UAM conference today too, and you listened on an infrastructure. So let's just expand a little bit on what Matt said, and what do they have to say about infrastructure for UAM?
Well, there's a lot of challenges to overcome, as you can imagine. Key challenges are safety, noise, sustainability, and economics. With safety, it's the convincing, because most people haven't flown in small aircraft to begin with. So how the challenge being, how do we get somebody who's never flown on a Cessna 172 to fly in a 4-seat, autonomously controlled rotorcraft, and then also obviously the noise is an issue. The noise is an issue from the perspective of not necessarily the aircraft, but where to locate these vertiports, as well as the flight paths that they'll use. Because you're not just talking about the urban environment, you're also talking about the suburbs as well, and then that brings out a whole nother issue, and that's the issue of privacy with these aircraft flying over people's backyards and whatnot. So. And then on the area of sustainability, how is this kind of activity going to affect wildlife, such as birds and butterflies? And then lastly, the economics. It's going to be each each vehicle is going to have to be highly utilized. I mean, it's going to have to be running, for a good whatever 8 or 9 or 10 hours, with no downtime, or no running at only one or two passengers per trip. That's just not sustainable, and that's not a way. That's not going to enable them to offer trips that are affordable for the average person. So there's a lot of things to think about with the infrastructure, and I think they really kind of what came out of this was it's these are still challenges that there's not a quick answer to. In the case of the economics, the one thing that the gentleman from Bell commented on was, starting out, it's going to be, it's likely that it's going to be the sort of the well-heeled first class jet passenger or business class passenger that's going to be the first to use this type of transportation. And how do you kind of get past that to where it's considered sort of a transportation tool for all?
Yeah, that's a big problem. Was there anybody from any cities or anything talking about what they're doing now to lay infrastructure groundwork?
There was a actually the moderator was with the city of Los Angeles, although she was just asking the questions. She wasn't giving any specific examples of what the city of Los Angeles is doing, in preparation for this.
Right. Yeah, LA is a pretty big city. I mean, they do have heliports, but probably not on the scale that they need them for a UAM operation. All right, so Kerry, you listened to the Bombardier Safety Standdown, and they held it virtually for the first time, obviously due to COVID. So how did that go?
It actually went well. Bombardier did something different for the first time this year, by going virtual like everybody else, but they actually had 4 lead-up sessions talking about different safety topics, and then they had one virtual day that ran about 5 hours, and they had 4 speakers. 3 of them are well known to Safety Standdown, and they had one new one, and they also presented their annual Safety Standdown Award, and they didn't give attendance figures or that I heard of like they had in the past, but there was some indication that there were at least hundreds, maybe even more, online tuning in. Usually it gets over 1,000, 2,000 people. So and Ed Boland came on and he congratulated them for keeping their focus on safety, even though amidst a very difficult time in everybody's lives and in the industry.
So who were the speakers, and briefly, what did they have to say?
One of the perennial favorites at Safety Standdown is Dr. Tony Kern, who's the CEO of Convergent Performance. And he is a science and behavior and safety, and he's made numerous safety talks, not just at Safety Standdown, but with organizations and many, many other association conventions and that sort of thing. But his topic was the infinite battle, the art and science of becoming. And basically what his message to the audience is that life is a series of challenges or an ongoing battle. And first of all, you have to recognize that you're in the battle, because if you don't, he says you've already lost it. And then it's really about how to come out at the other end of each one of these challenges. And it's not necessarily about being victorious, it's about growth and how you turn obstacles into opportunities. And, this was a very important message right now, because obviously we're all in the COVID pandemic environment, and there's stressors on all our lives that many of us don't even realize. And he threw out stats like, there's reports that 100,000 restaurants have gone away since COVID, and maybe only 20,000 comes back. And he says, does this play on aviation? Absolutely, because we're all carrying around these stressors that we don't even know. And we have to figure out how to turn this into a time of opportunity to, double down on our safety and our training and mentor others and, just lift it up. So it was a very interesting and timely discussion he gave. And following Dr. Tony Kern was another favorite of Safety Standdown, Amy Grubb, who was one of the people who helped turn around the FBI organizationally after 9/11. And she's still with the FBI. She's the chief assistant to the chief information officer. And she provided an overview of a design thinking concept on how to change culture. So you want to build your safety culture, and you want to get people to um, promote it and foster it. How do you motivate people to get there? And so she gave some very helpful tips and things to think about. One of her emphasis is to make sure you know what sort of positive change you're trying to affect, and that it's for the workers and not something that just dazzles you. And you have to be careful with how you present it and the words you choose. She said, sorry, safety experts, but the word safety is perceived as kind of nerdy. And so instead of saying we're trying to improve safety, we're trying to, prove performance, and performance tends to pick people up. She said, make it easy. She gave a great example of a person who said, well, I'm trying to introduce a recycling program, but nobody's using the bin. And she said, well, where is the bin? He said, well, it's right outside my office, which is 3 hangars away from everyone, or something like that. And so there's no incentive to people to go out multiple hangars to recycle their garbage. She said, put the bin where people can get to it. In other words, make it easy, and also make it difficult for people not to do this change. So, it was very insightful in a lot of different, and very helpful and thoughtful of how to get the changes and desired outcome. And she said, basically, make people feel good about this change. Make it not, oh, you're a bad person or you can't do it, but if you do this, you're a hero. Give positive reinforcement to it. She said her first safety stand down she went to, um, she just assumed everybody was there and for safety, and it was inherent in everyone's DNA, because she says, you would think the motivation of don't die is a motivator enough, but apparently people really need to be incentivized to make these positive changes, and incentivized in the right way. Anyways, another one of the speakers was Dr. Steven Stein, who is new to Safety Stand Down. He's kind of an interesting guy. He's the executive chair and founder of an organization called Multi Health Symptom or Systems, and they study um, your emotional intelligent quotient, how high it is, and how you manage through it. And he's done some consulting work for a lot of reality TV shows like the Great Race and MasterChef Canada. And so his studies into human behavior has been widely renowned. And so what he was doing is explaining some of the concepts of what emotional intelligence is, and some of the trademarks of it, and the whole approach to leadership. And they've talked about this a little bit in past safety stand downs. It used to be leaders were very strong and hard people, my way or the highway, and people went, oh, we revere you, so we're going to do it. And over time that's evolved, and that's not really the most effective, because it builds resentment, it builds less tie-in. people who are emotionally intelligent know how to tap into their workers. And so people who are leaders tend to have high emotional intelligence. They tend to be, willing to listen and hear and think about other people's thoughts. They know exactly their own emotion and how they react. And by knowing that, they can manage it better. They're adaptable, flexible. Um, and so these are all the qualities that are really rising to the top to some of the leaders. And also in piloting, the Top Gun pilots all have shown through studies to have very high emotional intelligence. So that was a very interesting discussion.
In a kind of a cruel twist, though, they put in a 5-hour virtual webinar, they put the guy talking about distraction at the end, right?
Oh yeah. Yes, that is absolutely true. I thought, oh man, now I really have to pay attention to a discussion on attentiveness. So that's a great lead into our last speaker, Tony Cortez, who actually, one of the things they did in Safety Stand Down, like I said earlier, is present their annual Safety Stand Down Safety Award. And they did give it to Tony Cortez. So their award winner was their final speaker. And he actually was a very engaging speaker, despite my jokes about having the session on, distractions and attentiveness at the end of the webinar. But and he talked about the different levels of attentiveness, and you don't, from being preoccupied to somebody who's barely listening to being totally absorbed to the point where you're blocking out all of their safety features because you've got um, tunnel vision, to being more active and focused and monitoring, engaged in what's going on. And that's really where you want to be. And one of the questions he gets is about multitasking. And yes, pilots multitask, but it's how you handle it. You can't. He gave an anecdote of a mission he flew, and he only had one task to do, and he was in I guess it was a hostile country. He didn't say which one, but he said it's one he'll never go back to again. But he gave an anecdote about how there was this, he was told not to fly over under any circumstances the palace of this country. And yet, for a split second, there was a safety issue on the airplane that diverted his attention. And his one job was to keep them from flying over the palace. And guess what? Because he diverted his attention, he lost focus on his one job, and which was fly over the palace, which involved, a lot of calls probably from the diplomats of our country to the leaders of that country. But so the point of that is you can really only focus on one thing at a time, even though you're trying to focus on many. So it's how you shape where your focus is and when it is. So it was kind of an interesting talk, and it was an interesting seminar, and they gave some very important messages during a very difficult time. And Ed Boland popped in briefly just to congratulate them. I think I said that earlier, but so yeah, I think next year hopefully we'll be back in the live, but at least they were able to broadcast a message to everyone.
Yeah, this is probably a good time to mention that Bombardier Safety Standdown is free, and they also have a recorded version of the 4 event webinars that they had leading up to this. I think they were 1 hour each, and then they also have the 5-hour webinar, or they will have the 5-hour webinar available for viewing later. So if anybody missed it and wants to see it, they can go to the Bombardier Safety Standdown site and register and log in and watch the video still.
And there's so many other messages. I could spend a long time. So hopefully I didn't steal all the thunder there.
Thanks, Kerry. Jerry, you also talked to Universal Avionics this week. They have a mobile demonstration unit you actually got to see in Wichita. So what's it like in a mobile demonstration unit? What's there?
Well, really, they call it the MDU for short, and because aviation loves acronyms, it's really set up like their booth would be at NBAA or some other large trade show, in which they've basically got their sort of flight deck with all their products in there. The fun part of the demonstration was was wearing their Skylens head wearable display, which is kind of their marquee product right now, and that allows the flight crews to see through meteorological conditions when they're during all phases of flight, but most critically during takeoff and landing.
I guess this is a mobile trailer of sorts.
It is. It's a trailer, and it's specifically it's equipped with FMS, with localizer performance, with vertical guidance capability, datacom, their Insight integrated display system, and their interactive synthetic vision system, and then of course their clear vision EFVS.
So if they put two wings and a pair of engines on it, they could actually fly it, right?
Well, yeah, I think they'd probably need to do a few more modifications, but yeah. This is more importantly, this MDU is really sort of it's born out of a desire to sort of remain relevant and stay in front of the customer in this era of COVID, where everybody's sort of hunkered down. It allows them to travel to their customers and to sort of present their latest and greatest in a setting that permits social distancing and
so where have they been? They've been in Wichita. We know that because you got to see it there. Where else have they been with the mobile display unit?
Well, they've been up in the Phoenix area, and of course they're Tucson based. The Phoenix area was the first sort of, I guess, the trial area. They hit 4 cities in Texas before they came up to Wichita. They were planning to go to Oklahoma, and then they're looking at Minneapolis, and eventually they'd like to make a sort of a run up and down the East Coast.
That would be a good place to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Along with this, they've acquired a Gulfstream G3 that they're outfitting with all their avionics, including that Skylens head wearable display. So customers can get a real world feel for that system.
So it sounds like they're investing a lot in things they can take to the customer instead of people going to like an MBA booth or something like that. It seems like they're investing in a lot of things that they can bring to the customer individually on a one-on-one basis.
They are. CEO told me that he sees these tools or this investment as something that will be used even if and when we get back to what we consider sort of the normal conditions.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. Cool. So, Curt, you did a story this week for our MBA special edition on family-owned businesses and in business aviation. So, you kind of honed in on 3 businesses to talk about. And what did you learn?
Well, yeah, Chad, I had the opportunity to visit with 3 of the companies. And when I say visit, I mean by phone. But I got a chance to visit with Duncan Aviation, which is now the largest privately owned business aviation services provider in the world. And I spoke with Todd Duncan, who's the chairman, and he's the 3rd generation of the company, which was founded back in the 1950s by his grandfather. And basically, his grandfather started out, he is a private pilot, and he bought surplus U.S. government aircraft, flew them around for a while, and then sold them for a profit. And he made a living out of that, and then eventually became a Beechcraft dealer, back when there were such things as Beechcraft dealerships before they took it all in-house. And they sold hundreds of airplanes and started expanding the company and went on from there. And today now they've got 3 major service facilities, and satellite facilities scattered around the country, and they employ about 2,300 people around the country. And it's the third generation of family ownership, and now he's proud to say that it's going to be the fourth generation, as his two twin sons just entered the business. One of them is an A&P mechanic, and the other one as in their auditing and bookkeeping department. But obviously, their legacy is cemented through another generation.
Yeah, you also talked to Cutter and Shelter too, and Cutter is actually one of the oldest aviation companies around, right?
Absolutely. There's no discussion about family-owned businesses in aviation without mentioning Cutter, and they've been in business now for 92 years. They had an FBO back before there even was such a term, FBO. They started out in 1928 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with William P. Cutter, providing aircraft maintenance and flight training and fueling, and even did a little bit of charter work. And again, the company then has been in Albuquerque now for 92 years. Sometime in the 1960s, they moved their headquarters to Phoenix, Arizona, where it is today. And this odd thing about Cutter, speaking with Will Cutter, the CEO, while a lot of companies have been hammered by the COVID situation, Cutter is saying they're going to have the best year this year in their 92-year history. And they're an aircraft dealership. He says they're selling all the airplanes they can get their hands on. Their shops are full. They're doing charter, and even their fuel sales aren't that bad. So he said this is going to be our best year ever.
Yeah, they kind of focus more on the lighter end of the market, though, the turboprops and the light jets, right?
Yeah, that's true. And if you look at Duncan, a large portion of their maintenance business came from overseas. You'd have companies flying in their aircraft. And as Todd Duncan said, about 15 to 20% of their business was international, and that's just basically flatlined. But he says they're going to make it through. They're doing okay with they're very heavily involved in Wi-Fi and avionics. And he said, well, a lot of companies are drawing back on their discretionary spending, such as cabin upgrades and things like that. They're still going with their maintenance and their avionics installations. So he says they're doing fine as far as that's concerned.
And you talked to Shelter, and they're on their third generation, right?
Yes, I spoke with Jerry Holland and his grandson, Kai Seymour, who's just joined the company. Kai just has graduated from the University of Tampa's business school with a business management degree, and he's currently now learning the ropes of the company as a management trainee, and he's going from department to department to immerse himself in the business. And I spoke with him, and he basically has kind of always known that he was going to be working in the company. He started out in line service, basically working his way through college, working for them. And basically, back when he was in high school, he's kind of already made his decision that he was going to go into the family business. So Jerry Holland was the company founder and chairman and CEO. And as he described it, he got into the aviation business by accident. Back in the early 80s, he was already a successful real estate developer, and he purchased some hangars on an airport from an acquaintance that he met at a party. And from then, he decided to add another portion of land, which happened to contain an FBO. And things didn't go so smoothly at first, but Jerry decided to study the business, and he learned a great deal and managed to turn that around, and then began building more hangars and began acquiring more property and began opening more FBOs to where they are today, with 18 FBOs around the country and more than 4 million square feet of aviation real estate under their belt. Jerry also earlier this year named his daughter, Lisa, who's an established businesswoman on her own, as the company president. So obviously their succession is assured.
That's great to hear. It's good to hear that small businesses are still thriving.
Yeah, all of them said, they can't imagine themselves doing anything else. They've all received offers over the years, and they've all acknowledged the influx of hedge fund and private investment money that's come into the market of late. But all of them credit their employees, their staffs who have been with them. In some cases, there's employees who have been with companies 40 years, and basically they say that they're doing it for them as much as for their families. They consider these employees their families now. They've been there so long. So
interesting. Thanks, Curt. Thanks for listening to AINdebrief. Another podcast episode will air next Friday. In the meantime, go to www.ainonline.com for the latest aviation news from AIN.